Hello and welcome to the UXJOBS Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Sykes, and a big aloha today because we are back and broadcasting from the North Shore of the island of Oahu in Hawaii. And let me tell you, it is so absolutely great to be back. I am in shorts and flip-flops yet again, and it is awesome. As always, folks, the goal of this podcast is to empower you to find your dream job or project and or to give you enough information to help you transition into this field. And I want to be able to be sure that it's presented in an actionable way. No theory, step-by-step preferred. So today we're going to be talking about going freelance, the pros, the cons, tools, and tips that you need to make it work. But before I introduce you to our special guest, I'm going to run a little exercise by you. I want you to imagine. So just take a minute right now to just get ready to imagine. I want you to imagine that you are standing in a vast green field. It is as open as far as the eye can see. Take a moment and imagine that. Can you imagine it? Now, as you look down at your feet, you see a bow and an arrow. Now, go ahead, pick them both up, and I want you to take the arrow and position it on the bow. Go ahead and do that. Now I want you to pull the bow back with the arrow, and I want you to aim that arrow. Can you envision it? Are you ready? Are you ready to let the arrow go? Now what's the obvious question here? What am I aiming at? Right? Well, really, that's the question that you have to ask yourself, and often. Because if you don't know where your target is, target job, target career, target lifestyle, if you don't have a target, what are the chances you are going to hit it? Now, when you pick a target, you can direct your energy, your efforts, you can create a tangible plan of action to hit it. So pick a target. Even if it turns out to be the wrong one, I've picked lots of wrong targets in my life. Pick a new one and keep doing that. But here's what you are guaranteed. You are guaranteed to miss every time if you don't know where your target is. You can put the bow down. We're back. This is the Greenville Exercise, and this is something I run at workshops and with new designers when we go around the room and sort of talk about, where do you want to be? What's your target career? What's your target goal? Right? Where do you see yourself in not 5 years or 10 years, but what do you really want to be doing with your life when you're pursuing design? And it always comes down, the answers that I always get are always the same. It's sort of I want to get as much experience as possible, and then I want to go freelance, or I want to start my own agency, I want to start my own company. And with that, I'd like to introduce our very special guest who can help us walk in that direction, Pek Pongpaet. Peck is the founder of imPekable, a full-service digital studio that employs over 30 people, with clients including Google, HP, Twilio, LegalZoom, Constant Contact, Motorola, and more. And prior to founding imPekable, Peck has worked for Accenture Technology Labs and for clients like Tesla and the U.S. Air Force. In addition, Peck has been interviewed and has written for publications such as Forbes, Entrepreneur, UX Magazine, and others. You can find him at imPekable, imPekable.com. Hey, Peck, welcome.
Hey, Ben, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my background is in engineering. I graduated with a computer engineering degree. I've been in the industry close to 20 years now. I started out as a software engineer, did that for about 7 years, realized that my passion was really more for the front end design, product design. This was kind of around the time that Apple started to have its resurgence. Steve Jobs had just come back to Apple, and his products were improving. Apple's products were improving, and the UI of Apple products were improving, and consumer internet products were upping the bar. And I felt like that's really where I wanted to be. I felt like I had a better impact, more impact on the user experience, or on the product itself, by affecting the user experience. So I started investing myself there. And over the years, people eventually stopped hiring me to code and started hiring me to design. And I did that for about 7 years as well, and before jumping in headfirst into my own startup ideas and eventually founding this imPekable digital agency.
Now, Peck, you've been freelance for a long period of time. Did you start out with the company first, or how did that work?
Yeah, I didn't have, the story I tell people is I didn't have this vision in mind. It kind of just organically happened. I started out as a freelance. I actually quit my job at a startup I was at in Chicago, and I moved out here to the Bay Area. This is where our office is right now in San Jose. Cold turkey. I didn't have a job lined up, and I was essentially freelancing. I was a freelancer for a while trying to do my own startups and funding my own startups with the freelance money. So I did that for about a year and nothing panned out. And then I kind of decided to double down or embrace, my freelance aspect, where I took a look at where the money was coming in. None of the startups were panning out. So I doubled down on freelancing and just grew that business.
So that sounds like a risky proposition, to be in Chicago and say, I'm going to a brand new market, I don't have anything lined up, and I'm just going to automatically get freelance work. Was that scary for you, or are you pretty confident that it was going to be easy?
I wouldn't advise that to anyone. And the thing I had going for me is I had established myself in the Chicago market. I had already developed some relationships, and people were propositioning to hire me to do product and UX and design. I basically already had a list of clients when I moved out here. Most of my clients, I would say 90% of my clients when I moved out here were Chicago clients. And I was just doing remote work because I already established a relationship with them. I hadn't started working for them yet, but when I moved out here, I said, hey, now I'm freelancing and you guys have wanted to work with me. I'm now available, except now I'm not in Chicago. Some of them took me up on it. So most of I was bringing in money, but Chicago money while living in the Bay Area. So my advice is, before you take the plunge, right there is, before you quit just cold turkey and say, hey, I want to quit my job and do my own thing, line up the clients, because what you're going to find out is if you didn't do that work, it's going to be crickets.
Well said. Here's the scenario. I've been a designer for a little bit. I've been working at a company, and now I want to go freelance. Where do I start? How do I get clients? Bare bones here. What steps do I need to take to move in that direction?
Great question. To touch on that, definitely start to network. Start to put feelers out there and say, hey, I'm thinking about going freelance. Just basically put it out there. Obviously don't make it so public that you tell your employer about it. Or maybe even tell your employer, say, hey, I want to start freelancing. Would you just consider hiring me? They've already hired you. They don't want to lose you. So some employers will want to take you however they can get you, right? Hey, we've worked with you before. We've hired you. And if you want to go part-time, hey, maybe we can work something out. So that would be one way. Another thing is, again, just start networking, start hitting up all your old contacts and say, hey, you've known me, you've known my work, or at least catch them up on your work and say, hey, I'm going to do this. Just tell as many people as you know. Number 3, definitely start putting together your portfolio and LinkedIn. And you should do that constantly. You shouldn't do that only when you need to. I know it's a lot of work. As a company, we work on our portfolio all the time. It's just something you have to make time for, whether it's updating your Dribble, your web portfolio, your Behance, social media. Using tools to cross-post to all of those things to save you time is great. But definitely keep your portfolio up to date and make sure that as many people as possible can see how fresh it is. Nobody wants to see portfolio from 3 years ago, or stuff that's still skeuomorphic.
Hey, I like skeuomorphism. What are you talking
There's nothing wrong with that, but it just kind of shows that this guy hasn't touched his or her portfolio in a while.
Sure. What I'm hearing is, number one, you step out onto the street and you say, I want to be a freelancer. You have to think of yourself as a brand now, and you have to treat yourself as a brand. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then the next step is getting the word out. Now, one thing that I found helpful, maybe, to add to what you've already said, is incubators. I walked into an incubator, I forget which one it is, it's over in the Twitter building, and I was working for an existing client, and as soon as other people found out that I was a UX designer, and so suddenly it was like potential client opportunity. go to multiple incubators in whatever town you're living in. In San Francisco, they're all over the place, and drop off a bunch of cards or go to one of those networking events, which is what you said as well. And then also, if you've got a really good portfolio that you're happy with, go to the VCs. VCs are acquiring companies that are small team companies, and they don't always have UX resources. And I've noticed Dan Portillo, who runs talent over at Greylock, they've gotten in the recruiting game. What other tips would you recommend?
As our company grows bigger, startups start to become less of an interesting client base for us. Earlier on, when you rattled off some of our clients, we've had clients like Honda, HP, Google, Motorola. Startups are great in the early phases for a couple reasons. You can knock out a lot of projects, you can get a lot of experience. But more often than not, statistically speaking, startups tend to fail, go out of business. Like, I can't tell you how many startups clients that we've done work for are no longer around. So if you want to think about the longevity of your client, that could be a consideration. If you're just starting out, you'll take whatever you want, right? Like, just as we did when we were first starting out, we had a lot of startup clients. We weren't too picky. But as you grow, as you mature into a designer, you may want more stability. You may not want to constantly hunt for new clients because all your old clients are going out of business. So that's one consideration. That said, the startup may fail, but the people within that go on to work on other stuff, right? They move on with their lives. They pick up where they left off. They may go join other startups. They may go join big companies. So do keep that network alive. You do UX work for a startup and it fails, ping the people you work with and see where they end up. If they've worked with you before and they like your work, most likely they're going to hire you again. A lot that has happened to us many times. One of our clients early on, they failed pretty badly, and in fact, they couldn't even afford to pay us. They had to shut down and close shop, and many of the service providers just didn't get paid. And so we kind of got the short end of that. Not long after that, he joined a big company, and he was in charge of a pretty big project, and he looped us in, and he kind of made it right by us by giving us that big project. Because he liked our work so much. So do keep in touch with everyone you've worked with, even if their startup failed.
Yeah, it really is a who you know industry, and all the more reason to play well in the sandbox, as they say.
Sure.
Some of the pros of being a freelancer are you've got freedom of time, you can choose your projects. You can pretty much live wherever you want if you don't need to be on site. I'm a digital nomad. I work remotely from Hawaii, New York, San Francisco, probably New Zealand at the end of the year. I can do my chores in between meetings, which is kind of nice. What are some of the additional pros that you have found working for yourself?
Sure. So you mentioned, working for yourself, being able to choose your own hours, being able to pick your own clients. I think that is true to a certain extent. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you guys. I'm going to tell you like it is because I don't want you to go into the audience going into this thinking, oh, it's all going to be great. You're not going to hear rah-rah stories. I'm going to tell you the raw, gritty reality that we live in as digital, people like myself
awesome.
Who hire
Good.
digital nomads and stuff like that. Some of the pros I would start off with is I somewhat get to control my own destiny. If I want to invest in X, I invest in X. If I want to do Y, I do Y. So, for example, we never had a project with regards to drones, but for whatever reason, I love drones. So, as an R&D project, we thought we'd invest in doing some drone work. We never actually got an Apple Watch project, but when the Apple Watch came out, I said, you know what, I want to get into this. Before everybody else gets in. So we started doing design work for Apple Watch. We even worked on an Apple Watch app when the Apple Watch API was still in beta, WatchKit. And out of that, we actually got a real project. By investing in that, we got a real project by a department store who wanted an Apple Watch app. And they looked around in the Bay Area and they saw that no one was doing it except for this one little company that was starting to do it before everybody else. So being able to invest in what you want, when you're freelancing, as opposed to, say, working for another company, that's great. You may have, that said, you may work for a company that lets you do that, which is great too. So that's the good stuff, is being able to decide for yourself what you want to work on, right? Like, hey, I want to focus on Android. I want to focus on mobile. I want to focus on VR. I don't know, whatever it is you want to do, you can choose your own destiny as long as you can pay for it. Now, the reality of, hey, being able to choose your own clients, yes and no. When you have enough work coming in that you're so busy that you can turn down clients, then yeah, you can afford to be picky. But when the pickings are slim, you take whatever you can. So that's the reality. The other thing is, choosing your own hours. So Ben and I are, Ben is a digital nomad himself. It's 11 o'clock here in Pacific, but it's pretty early in Hawaii. So he is being very obliging by accommodating to my hours. And that is truly the reality of being a digital nomad. We hire a lot of digital nomads ourselves, not necessarily digital nomads, but offshore contractors. And some of the key points that you'll have is, yes, you're not really going to control your hours if you want to keep your clients. 9 to 5, if you say, oh, I want to control my own hours, I'm going to work only 9 to 5, but I'm going to be in Indonesia. Well, that's not going to work for your clients in the Bay Area or New York, right? They don't want to converse with you at 3 a.m. in the morning, their time. Being able to be flexible with your time is key. And also awareness of the time zones. Even as we speak, my desktop has the following time zones: India, China, New Zealand, Ukraine, Czech Republic, and Vietnam. And these are just my people. I'm not even, my clients are East Coast, Midwest, Mountain Time, and Pacific. Even then, I have to be very cognizant of the time zones, both of my people and of my clients. For example, if I have to have something by the end of the day and my client's in New York, end of the day in New York is 5 p.m. It's not, they don't mean 5 p.m. my time. 5 p.m. my time is 8 p.m. their time. So I need to be really keenly aware of what people talk about, what time zone they're in. And not just me. My people have to be keenly aware of it. And that's one of the prices you pay for having this flexibility of being where you want to be, right? I think the flexibility that you get is you can do this from where you want to be, right? Whether it's Hawaii or New Zealand. I have a designer working on Wellington, New Zealand right now. But that said, our Monday morning is a different time zone, right? Like she needs to be a little bit flexible and we need to be a little bit flexible. What are the other key things you need?
For me, when I work in Hawaii, I keep all of my clocks. I even change the clock on the microwave, everything to be Pacific Standard Time. So I live on PST, and I'm happy to do it. It makes my life a lot easier. It's easier for me to coordinate meetings with people that are on the West Coast, and it's easier for me to do the math for New York, too. It's just easier to do that. What does that mean? It means that I get up at, 6 or 7 in the morning, Pacific Standard Time, which is 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. in Hawaii. It doesn't bother me. The end of my days are my own, which means I have a whole lot of light in Hawaii to go surfing or hiking or whatever I want. And then my weekends, of course, are ultimately my own. That is a really small price to pay as far as I'm concerned. But it is tricky, and you have to be incredibly diligent about multiple time zones and operating in multiple time zones. And that is actually a skill.
It is a skill. It is a skill. Yeah. We young people who haven't worked long with us, they'll dial in and then good morning. Being a UX designer, your user is your client. One of your users is not just the user of the app you're designing, but your user is actually your client. And being aware of the time zone your user is in is one skill. Being able to even just say the right greeting, right? If it's evening their time or afternoon, you should say afternoon. Not just because it's your morning doesn't mean anything to the end user, your client. So that's like you said, it's a skill.
What are some additional pros of being a freelancer?
I think you get to expense a lot of stuff. I am probably a gadget freak. I would classify as a gadget freak. We have at least 3-4 smartwatches in the office. We have drones. We have tablets. We have beacons. We have no shortage of high-tech devices, all of which have some business use. So we get to expense all that. Now, if you're an employee and you buy all this stuff, that's probably not expensible. But since this is all work related, we get to expense all this stuff. So that's one pro of being a freelancer is, a lot of business expenses you can write off.
All the camera gear that I buy, all the VR headset, the Gear VR camera, which I've been testing, all of that is all itemized and expense when I file 1099.
Sure. Yeah, there just has to be a legitimate business purpose to it. We've done drone research. We've programmed. One cool example that we've done is we've written an Apple Watch app to interface with a drone so that you can control the gimbal and the rotation using the watch accelerometer. So that's pretty cool.
That is very cool.
Yeah, we even have a video around that. It's done pretty well in terms of social media, kind of very Tony Starkish. To that point, yeah, you get to expense a lot of stuff that's kind of business related that you otherwise wouldn't.
What about having a boss? Like one of the things that people, they're like, I am my own boss. I mean, with that, you have to manage your time incredibly well, and you have to have some discipline. What can you say about that?
The irony is having your own business means you trade in one boss for as many bosses as you can handle, and they're called clients. If you're okay with that, that's a pro. If you can fire your boss. If you don't like a particular client and you're doing okay enough to absorb it, you can fire that client and say, I don't want to deal with this guy.
Sure.
So you can kind of just say, hey, we can't work with you. So you have that ability. If you have one boss, then that's a little tough to do unless you've lined up another boss.
It's not all peaches, and we're going to get into the cons of working freelance. It's not all rose-colored glasses at all, but would you, if you had the option, would you go back and work for a company?
That's the thing. It's like, as much as I bitch and moan about it, I wouldn't have it any other way. The pros for me outweigh the cons. And that said, there are many cons, right? Like the multiple time zones, working around client time, working around our contractor time, having multiple bosses, like I just mentioned, crazy deadlines, not just from one project. If you work for a company, you may have one project that you're working on. As a freelancer, you may take on multiple projects simultaneously, and let's just say they all come due at the same time. You'll have those times. Those can be hectic as well. But that said, you do have, if you're planning to be a digital nomad, you can be doing this in Hawaii, in Thailand. One of our employees she really wants to get some travel time in. And next year, she plans to go to Thailand, to Vietnam, to Taiwan, to Japan, a few other countries, for 6 months. And that's okay with us because 2/3 of our team is already remote. What's another person, right? So that's one of the benefits. But with that, there are certain things that you have to do to be able to accomplish that and make it work seamlessly.
Some of the other cons that I found personally are, it can get, if you're by yourself and you've got a deadline, you're going to be in a room for however long it takes, which, you can get cabin fever, which is not a big deal. Cabin fever, and then you walk out onto the lanai and you're in Hawaii, so that's not too bad, but it can get a little lonely, and it's a lot less collaborative than actually meeting with the team around a whiteboard. What do you think about that?
Yeah, for that, one of the required skills for remote people, is responsiveness and communication. We expect our people to have Slack and the tools we use on their phone because we may want to, if you're remote and you don't communicate, that's a problem, right? You can't have it both ways, right? You have to, if you're remote, you have to be responsive. You have to have some overlap with the team you're working with. I'm not saying 8 hours of overlap, but there's got to be some overlap with the team you're working with, because if they have a question, they don't want to wait 12 hours or 6 hours to get the answer, because otherwise it's too late. Clients don't want to wait that long. Your team doesn't want to wait that long, and your project deliverables will suffer. So being responsive, one of the prices is you have your tools on your phone, so that if you are on the beach and somebody throws a question at you, you can fire off a quick answer and be back to whatever you were doing. That's one of the big skills that people have to learn. And also over-communicate. If you know that, hey, I'm going to do this deliverable and then go to bed for 8 hours while my team at some point will come online, I need to over-communicate. I need to over-document so that there's no ambiguity or as little ambiguity as possible, so that when there is time passage, there's not a lot of questions.
And another, I guess it's a con or it's just something to consider, is that here you are, you're running a business. If you're working for yourself, ultimately be a sole proprietor, or you can file yourself as an LLC. Now, I started an LLC. My LLC is Syked, S-Y-K-E-D, exclamation point LLC. It's a Delaware corporation. Took me an hour to set up, if that, on LegalZoom, and maybe $600 later. So I am a legitimized LLC, but in that, I have to make sure that I file all my taxes properly, that I have an accountant. There's so many other things to consider when you're running a business. So you've got to juggle all of these existing clients and their projects and their timelines and their time zones, coupled with maybe other contractors that you've hired to help you with the workload, coupled with running an actual business yourself. Tell me a little bit about the business part of it. Is that challenging for you?
Yeah, and I would say there's a huge difference between being a solo freelancer, digital nomad, and having and thinking about having your own agency where eventually you may have a team working for you or with you. Being a freelancer, I think you just need to have enough business coming in just for yourself, right? You may have slow months, you may have great months, but as long as you have enough work just to pay yourself and keep yourself afloat, it's not so bad, right? And you can be anywhere. If you are serious about having your own business one day, like you want your own agency, kind of like what I have, you have to think about it as a business. And one of the realities that you have to be okay with is if you love design and all you want to do is design, don't start a business, because that'll be the last thing you do. Because you'll be marketing, you'll be looking for clients, you'll be doing a lot of contracts and paperwork. You'll constantly be recruiting. You will constantly be... There's tons of stuff that needs to happen in a business that is not the core part of the business. Just like if you were a baker and all you wanted to do is bake cakes, don't start a bakery, because then you become a small business owner. That's essentially what I am, is a small business owner. But that in itself is very fulfilling in many ways. Watching the team grow, watching the company grow, putting the things in place, training, mentoring, all that is fulfilling to me. Growing the team, developing the team. It's definitely a different skill set, and I've had to learn it on the job with really not much guidance. I didn't go to school for this. I just read a lot, talked to a lot of people who are slightly ahead of me, who have agencies they've been running before me. The enjoyable aspects is you learn new skills, you grow as a person, and you watch other people grow when you start your own business and you develop these people.
So Peck, one of the things that I found being independent or being a freelancer is that location is everything. Now, I am based in San Francisco. I have a 415 phone number. I have an address in San Francisco, but I also have a New York address. I also have a New York phone number. I also have a Hawaiian address and Hawaiian phone number, and I can set that up in any country that I go to, whether I use Google Voice through a new Gmail account within the U.S. only, or I spend the extra money to set up a virtual mailbox. Google that, folks. Virtual mailbox. You can literally have an office or a satellite office anywhere. One of the issues that I found is that if I list myself as a Hawaiian resource and not a San Francisco resource, now I'm sort of out of the potential for getting San Francisco clients. So it's very important that I am located in the hot market that I'm listed, rather than listed someplace else. Because I think humans are hardwired for geo. If they think that you're not within a 20-mile vicinity, suddenly you're sort of labeled consciously or unconsciously as unavailable. I can be on a plane and fly anywhere at a moment's notice. That's one of the beauties of the work that I do. And as such, I don't want to be limited by a specific market. So I market myself as being San Francisco, because that's where all the work is. That's where the majority of my clients are. If they need me tomorrow, I can hop on a plane and be there tomorrow. What are your thoughts about sort of location as limiting? And what tools have you developed to sort of manage that?
This is very interesting, Ben. I like how you've crafted a persona, an external persona, to make it seem to the client that you're basically in San Francisco and maybe you're just out of town. And that's a great way to make it seem like you even though you're a digital nomad, that you are physically there and you just don't happen to be there because you're out of town for some reason. We have a few similar hacks, on our Dribbble. So we are headquartered in San Jose. San Jose is about 55 miles from San Francisco, but we might as well be in the boondocks for as far as San Franciscans are concerned. So we list ourselves as Bay Area or San Francisco. So on our Dribbble profile, you'll see our listing as San Francisco. Our Behance will be San Francisco. Even what we've done too is we have we work out of a co-working space. Our two listings for the Bay Area are the same co-working space, but the San Francisco office, because it's very easy if a client wants to meet. Since I already pay for that membership, it's very easy for me to just go to that San Francisco location and schedule a conference room there and just say, this is one of our offices. By listing ourselves as being in the heart of where the action is and where all the business is concentrated, that makes us more searchable, right? Like nobody is searching for designers in San Jose, or rather the search volume is much greater, for designers in the Bay Area or San Francisco proper.
Sure.
So those are some of the very similar hacks we do. Getting yourself, a local number, 650 for me. I still keep my Chicago number, but I also have a 650 Google Voice number, and it's pretty easy these days to just get any number for any location. If I wanted to be more hardcore about it, I could get one of our remote workers is in Las Vegas, one of our remote workers is in Fort Collins. Actually, we list Fort Collins, since I pay for a co-working space there, we list as one of our addresses also a Fort Collins address. So technically, we do have an office. We have a one-person office in Fort Collins. And if I wanted to go hardcore about it, I could get a Fort Collins number as well. So those are some of the things you can do. Slack is a big component of our communication. Our offshore team, many of our offshore team prefer Skype. So we use a combination of Skype and Slack. The engineers, remote engineers, tend to prefer Skype. Actually, the voice quality of Skype is superior to Google Hangout, so sometimes we will switch to Skype for voice. Trello is also used to manage some projects. We use Jira. We're starting to use Confluence as a wiki. Google Apps, of course. One of the great things we do is, when you get on Google Apps, the Google Calendar. I live and die by my Google Calendar. I put stuff on my calendar, and I tell my team how to look at other people's calendar on their teams. Because if they want to schedule a meeting, they need to know who's available when. So if a team member wants to loop me into a meeting, a call with a client, they just need to look at my availability, and you can see that by adding others' calendars in Google Calendar. Another hack that a lot of people don't know is in Google Hangout, you can dial them in, not just via email. So if I'm on the road and I'm driving and I can't get to the phone or get to my computer, it's really hard for me to join a Google Hangout. So what I'll do is I'll ask people to dial me in while I'm driving, and I just take it via the Bluetooth in my car, and that's much nicer. So there's a way to add someone by calling them in via Google Hangout, and it's pretty easy to do. There's like a little keypad icon there, and not a lot of people know that because the UI it's a little buried, but we use that quite a lot as well.
Very cool. As far as designing, what tools do you prefer? From like low fidelity, I'm a big Balsamic, to Sketch, to Zeppelin. That's kind of how my workflow works. How about yourself?
Yeah, I used to use Balsamic quite a lot. Nowadays, I don't do much design, and if I do wireframe, I just do it in pen and paper, and then I give it to one of my designers to execute. But we do wireframing in Sketch as well now. We do high fidelity mockups in Sketch. We'll take it to InVision. We try to get our clients to use InVision to leave comments and stuff like that. Not all of them do, but the ones that do, that's great. And then once it's ready to be handed off to engineers, we use Zeppelin for that. So we use Zeppelin as a handoff tool, the speccing document. I think that's great. We pay for that.
Love it.
Yeah, and another tool we recently started using is Principle. So Principle is an animation tool, and not all of our clients care about animations, but for the ones that do, we use Principle to kind of present animations. That's really cool as well.
So let's talk about portfolio, right? Portfolio is everything. It's really a showcase of your work. It's your brand. It's your calling card. How important is portfolio to you?
Very important. I think a lot of our clients, we have, especially for young designers who don't have the big clients yet or the client work to showcase, it's even more so to build your own portfolio. And if you don't have clients, make up clients. Just take on personal projects and do pick up a project and make up your own portfolio that way and build your own portfolio that way. You could redesign Chase, you could come up with a social networking app, you do whatever, but have a story to tell, show your work somehow. And if it's not via clients, then it's via your own personal projects, and that's totally fine. As long as the quality is good, that does hit a check mark.
Pek, I think that's incredibly valuable. That's one of the questions I've gotten from early designers that get out of General Assembly or some other schools. They say, well, I've got some class projects, but how do I get more portfolio pieces to get the work? If I can't get the work, to get portfolio pieces. And it's really what you just said. It's go ahead and create it. Like, what does Zipcar look like with gamification? What does Pinterest look like with a wedding registry? Go ahead and design those things. I mean, you remember when, before the Apple Watch came out, I think there was a guy named Todd Hamilton who came up with his own prototype of what the Apple Watch. It was like 4 screens.
Yeah, that is basically your portfolio right there. And nobody asked him to do it, right? He just took it upon himself to do it. And that's, I think, the big differentiator between someone who's waiting for the job to happen and someone who's taking charge and making it happen.
Totally agree. And I remember in the early days, for me, trying to get new clientele, I would see a website or I'd see a web property or an app, and I thought, man, I can do this better. And then I would redesign, high fidelity, at least 4 or 5 screens, and then I would send that with a proposal letter. Here's some of the screens. Give me a call if you're interested. Have you ever done something like that before?
Yeah, we've pitched clients. I'll generally invest a little bit, maybe do a hero image, a hero shot, that's what we call it, just to try to win the work, right? I know in the industry there's very much some negativity about doing spec work, and I agree with that. We shouldn't devalue our work and do it for free.
Right.
But you can say, hey, here's what I'm thinking, and give them, maybe one screenshot, like, hey, here's a concept I'm thinking for you. What do you think? And that makes it relevant to them, right? You can show other past client work, but it's not really relevant to them, right? When they see that, oh, this guy can put themselves in your shoes and make it relevant to them, that's a much more compelling proposition. I would say, we've won definitely not 100% of our work that we've done stuff like this for, but we definitely have won work before by doing stuff like that, where we put together a concept, a single screenshot or so, and say, hey, this is what we're thinking, or this is how you could improve, or to do that.
What advice would you give to brand new designers that are looking to become freelancers at some stage? The
field is called user experience, and my term is probably a little broader, and I apply user experience not just to the products I design. So what does that mean? If you're designing an app, a lot of times a designer will try to put themselves in the shoes of the user of the app. And they may do a great job of that, and that's great user experience. But that's just one window or aspect of user experience. Your client is also your user in many sense. They're the ones handing you a paycheck. So in that sense, they are also your user. So I think about the user experience between my service and the client. What is that user experience like? The people you work with, people you hand off your assets to, is also the user. So like my sketch file, Is that neat or is that a mess? Are the layers labeled, or is it layer 21, layer 23, group 14, ungrouped, unnamed, whatever. Within our team now, we have a process where we have standard operating procedures where there's a convention to organizing your sketch file. Because 6 months from now, you may be onto another project and I may have to give that sketch file to somebody else. And if it's a mess and they can't navigate it, that's a bad user experience for that designer. So I'm making sure that we craft a good user experience for our own designers. Or if you're handing that sketch file off to an engineer and it's a mess, that's a bad user experience for that developer. So we want to craft a good user experience for them too, not just the client, not just for the end user. So we think about user experience in many ways that way.
That is great advice.
Yeah, I would encourage young designers to not just think about user experience so narrowly that it's just about the user of the app. The user, anything you hand off to somebody, there's a user experience happening there. You're a client. You're handing your deliverables to a client. You're presenting your deliverables to a client. How do you present your deliverables to a client? That's user experience too. You're working with another designer. If you're working on a big project, that's user experience, right? There, what kind of user experience do you want that designer who's working with you to have? If you're handing files back and forth and it's a mess, that's a bad user experience. This happens quite a lot where you may be the primary designer, and let's say there's an Android version, so now you're handing an iOS sketch file to someone who's going to turn it into an Android app. If your files are messy, that's bad user experience. If you didn't slice your sketch file appropriately and your Zeppelin file is a mess, that's bad user experience for the engineer who's going to work on it. And it creates friction, it creates frustration, and it doesn't create a seamless workflow, and it creates wasted time.
Peck, that's the first time I've heard anybody talk about that. I absolutely love that perspective. You're so right. That needs to be conveyed to many, many people, and it's a nice reminder for myself. The best work is where every touch point, where it's seamless.
I would say that's kind of like high level, right? Like mastery of just the user experience of the app is one level, right?
Sure.
When you have mastered these aspects, these touch points, it's just another level. Such a nice experience to work with a designer who's aware of all these touch points, as opposed to, I'm a great designer, I make great apps, but, hey, here's a mess of a file, here's the sketch file, I don't care, do what you will with it, go figure it out, as a huge different experience to a person who can work at that different level, where they're cognizant of the experience that they're providing to their clients, to the engineers, to other designers, to stakeholders and stuff like that.
What about money? Let's talk about money. Now, when I started off in the mid-90s, I didn't know my own value. And it was very difficult for me to price my services. One, because if I priced too high, people didn't understand the value of the work. It's just a website. What's the big deal? Why is it $1,000? That's insane. Of course, the market has since shifted, and the value of the work is well understood, or even more so now. What advice would you give to new designers on what their rate should be as new freelancers?
Being very cognizant of the market is one thing, right? And you can get that on Indeed, Glassdoor, Salary.com, all those things. So being keenly aware of the market that you're in, right? What is considered reasonable in San Francisco proper is not the same as, something in the Midwest, right? It might be egregious in the Midwest just because the cost of living is much lower and therefore the salary is much lower. So being aware of the region and also being aware of the client themselves. Even if you're interviewing for a job at, one of the big Bay Area companies like a Google, Yahoo, Facebook, Twitter, you can expect different offer than imPekable, right? We're a small, self-funded, bootstrap studio. We're not VC funded. The expectations have to be kind of in line with that. So that's one thing. The second thing is being aware of the client. Number one is being aware of the market. And then number three is being aware of where you stand in the scheme of things. So where your level is at, if you're a beginner, are you a super green beginner, or what do you bring to the table, right? If you are mid-level, you just have to be keenly aware of your own level and where you stand. And also, number four would be, what do you want out of it? For example, like imPekable. Like I'm the owner of imPekable. I could probably make more money at Google, yes, but there's so many more things I get out of here that I don't get out of being an employee at Google. So those are the factors you have to consider. Is like what else are you getting out aside the monetary compensation? We have a pretty remote team. One of our web engineers is working out of Seattle. That's probably not something that's going to fly with some of these. Bay Area companies they talk about remote work, but a lot of companies, there's a reason they have a big office in SF proper is because they want you to be physically located there. One of the perks of working with this company is as long as you're communicative, as long as you're present on the various channels, we don't care. And you get your work done. We don't generally care. Being able to be remote, being able to live in the town and city that you want is a perk. So understand what you want to get out of it, and not just monetary compensation is important.
Do you recommend charging by the hour or charging per project? And what are the pros and cons of each?
We have 3 general models. One is just straight up by the hour. 3 hours of design time, sure, 3 hours. That's probably the least risk, and I would recommend starting with that. Charging by the project can be both a pro and a con. If you are a fast worker and you understand the expectations of the client really well and they're pretty easy to please, a fixed price project might be very profitable or beneficial to you. You priced it out and you can get it done in half the time you've estimated, you'll pocket a lot of money. The third model is sort of a retainer model, meaning you kind of guaranteed, hey, if you guarantee me some hours, so here's my base hourly price, right? It's X. But if you book me for 3 months, you get X minus a percentage. Or if you book me for 6 months, you get X minus a slightly bigger percentage. The benefit for you is you don't have to, that they're committed to you and you don't have to go hunting for new work. If you charge by the hour, we have clients who we charge by the hour, and it's because they have no idea of how much they want to use you, right? They may use you 4 hours one week and 20 hours another week and maybe like 36 hours another week. So it's like very highly fluctuating, and that can cause a lot of stress for an individual. So you may want to figure out a retainer, right? Whether it's maybe a weekly retainer. Hey, here's my weekly price so that I don't have to worry about this week. Work is going to be low. Or you may say, hey, here's my 3-month price. Here's my 6-month price. And then that way you kind of warded off that stress a bit. That's how it really depends on the comfort level of the person.
Now, what happens if a client or potential client in negotiating phase says, we want to offer you a large chunk of equity in exchange for your rate? Again,
that is your comfort level. That is your own personal risk tolerance. I would say we've done very few of those. Let's see. Here's my own experience, the imPekable experience. In the past, we've designed for clients who've gone on to be acquired by Google, by Dropbox, by Airbnb, by LegalZoom. We only took in cash for that. We really could have used, gotten our hands on some pre-IPO Dropbox shares, for example, right? Wouldn't that have been nice?
Sure.
IPO Airbnb shares, whatever. So in the following year, we said, okay, we're doing a little bit better. We can afford to take some risk for the clients that we think might have some potential. We may discount our services and take some equity on just some, right? Not a lot. So we did that, and this was in 2015. And I can tell you right now, at least 2 of them have gone out of business. Another one is kind of in zombie mode. They're still around, but they can't raise money and whatever. And the other one is doing okay, right? Like, I don't think they're just humming along. I don't know what I'll ever see out of that, right? Maybe something in the in the next 5 years, maybe something will come out of that. Who knows? I wouldn't count it, right? If you need the cash now, don't do it. Statistically speaking, it's like a lottery, right? I would say, and there's so much you don't control, right? Like, even with everything going right, even if you design an amazing product, maybe the engagement isn't there. Maybe the business model doesn't make sense. Maybe they don't, maybe they're not able to get the next round of funding that they need. So many things can go wrong. So many things are out of your control. I would say unless your risk tolerance is up there, probably don't do it. Or at least think of it as play money, that you're totally okay with not getting or losing it completely and totally writing off. If you're okay with that and you want to play with let's play money, sure, go for it. But other than that, I think like what we would prefer is cash, because we can deploy that cash however we want. We can use that cash to bootstrap our own ideas. So if you have your own idea for your product or project, unpaid, then you can use that cash to do that. But if you take it as equity and someone else's equity, then you kind of lose some of that control.
I'm sitting at home, the phone rings, someone calls me and says, hey, I'd love to use your services as a UX designer. I hear you're freelance, or I saw your portfolio, or whatever it is. Typically for me, it starts with a phone call. On the phone call, I have a certain set of questions that I ask. Do you have designers currently? Are you guys funded? What problem are you trying to solve? I ask all the questions that I need answered to determine for me whether or not this is a client that I want to pursue moving forward with. If it is, then the next step in my flow is I schedule an in-person or video conference for an hour. I start to requirements gather, enough for me to create what's called a statement of work, or an SOW. What services would you want me to provide, and in what time frame? And once I get all of that information and I really understand, after the meeting is over, then I write what's called a statement of work. And I have a template that I use, which clearly maps out all the parts and pieces, the estimation of time, who's involved, payment arrangement. I like to be paid in thirds, some amount at the very beginning, some at a halfway point, which we determine together, and then a final third at the end. I send it off for approval. They make adjustments to it. I sign it digitally. They sign it digitally, and then we set a start date. And I find that if I don't have something defined or I don't have something signed, I really increase the risks that I will not actually get paid either on time or ever. What are your thoughts there?
I follow a very similar path. And, to that point, though, even if you have a signed contract, I've had clients pull out and not pay us. So, it is a piece of paper. It only offers as much protection as I think the trust and the behavior of the person. Because ultimately then, if they don't pay you, then you got to decide, well, how much money what's at stake? And then I have to engage a lawyer and pay them. If the cost of doing that is equal to or greater than the amount in question, then I'm like, really, it's a lose-lose situation, right? And then my only recourse is just to keep nagging them and then blacklisted somehow. That said, I don't start anything until there's some sort of written commitment. For long-term clients where I've worked with them before and I know they're good for the money, I generally will, if they have a rush project and they were still working out this, trying to get the signature, I'm flexible enough to just go ahead and start. And they do appreciate that, and it's usually worked out. Hey, the budget is in the process of getting approved, but hey, this is due, in X amount of weeks, and if we didn't get moving, if I've worked with them before and we have a history, that's fine. If I've never worked with them, nothing gets done until there's a signed piece of paper and a deposit. Especially with new clients, for new people, I would strongly recommend definitely getting a deposit, especially if you're working with startups, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know if they're leading you on about their finances, so I wouldn't risk it. Definitely requiring a deposit is a marker or indication of at least, some sort of level of seriousness. I do follow pretty much very similar to what you do. If I have a client, I try to categorize them in terms of, whether it's a small opportunity, medium, or big. And if it's a medium or big opportunity, even the first contact, I would like to meet them in person because, I think that just sets the tone of the type of service we want to provide is, very hands-on, high-touch, quality service, right? And plus, you have that level of trust. If you never meet the person, don't ever want to meet them, and they're just you treat them as a very transactional relationship, I think that doesn't engender trust and a level of more beyond that, right? Like, I think people want to work with people they know, people they feel comfortable with. If it's a big enough opportunity for me, I'd like to meet them in person, definitely, and create some sort of rapport. We have enough coming work now that what I do is, you ask all these questions. we ask all those questions too. What we've done is we've gone a step further and we created a Google Docs form of this questionnaire. The reason for this is so that it's a process, right? Like I may forget to ask certain questions, but if I have a questionnaire in front of me, I know I need to ask all these questions, right? Like same thing with you. Like, hey, are you funded? What type of service do you need? So one question is like mark all the services that apply to your project. Do you want user experience design? Do you want UI design? Do you need a website? Do you need a mobile app? Do you need a tablet app? Mobile website, does it have to be mobile responsive? Do you need logo? Do you need an app icon? Do you need branding? Do you need front-end development? Do you need SEO? So on and so forth, right? Like people sometimes assume, and if you assume incorrectly, then you've misquoted your project. So you're like, oh, I thought the UX included the code. And I'm like, no, that's a separate project or separate amount of work. Other things we ask other than is this the timeline. Like when they call you and say we need this done by Friday. I'm like, oh well, okay, that's one expectation. Also, another important thing is the literacy of your client, meaning are they technical? Have they worked? You want to understand if this is their first rodeo, right? We work with first-time entrepreneurs or non-tech entrepreneurs sometimes. And, they don't even know what wireframes are. We give them wireframes. Like, why is this in black and white? You have to understand the literacy of your audience as well. So
that's a really good point.
Have you worked with a tech product, tech company before? Have you worked with a design agency before? Do you understand what the deliverables are? Right? Like, they send them, we got our own engineer. Okay, well, we're going to send you a sketch file. That's our deliverable. What's a sketch file? And this engineer's never heard of Sketch. So those are the things you have to establish because they were expecting something else. An engineer may expect all the assets to be pre-sliced and pre-exported for you. Who is the decision maker? That's one mistake I made very early on where we dealt primarily with the CTO in the beginning, and the project was pretty much almost done. And then the CEO comes in and he's like, I don't like this. This is all wrong. And then the CTO is like, well, I defer to the CEO. Well, the project's already been signed off. Everything's pretty much done. And we had to restart the project all over again.
Wow.
Because the key decision maker was not involved until the very end. And that was a huge mistake. So now we learn, like, okay, who are the decision makers? Who can veto all this? Well, they need to be involved early on or every step of the way because you don't want to eat that cost. You were made to believe that somebody was responsible and then they don't have any decision-making power. Brand-specific brand guidelines, for example. Do you have, if you're working with a big company with an established product, you need those brand guidelines or design guidelines, color schemes, all that stuff. You need logos, the right stuff. These are just some of the questions. So, as you get working, you kind of learn all these things that you have to ask. So what we've done is we have a new project intake questionnaire. And what's really nice about that is I don't have to go through this process. If I'm too busy, I can even have a junior designer ask all these questions just by sending them the link of the new project form. The designer who even just started on board can just go through and just get the answers. And then once we get the answers, now we have a sense of what the project is like.
I think that is so, so important. It sets expectations with the client. It makes it easy to disseminate. Great feedback.
Yep.
Pek, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on today. The advice, the tips, your experience, phenomenal. And it's going to help a whole lot of new designers. It's definitely helped me. I've already been taking a few notes. Thank you so much for making the time to come on the UXJOBS podcast. Is there any website that you want to plug or are you hiring designers? Where can we go to find out more about you?
Sure. imPekable.com, IMPEKABLE. We have a pretty active social media accounts. Our Twitter and Facebook are pretty active, and we're also on Instagram. Find us all there. For new UX designers or designers getting into the industry, we started a new program. So aside from our client services, we started learn.imPekable.com, where now we are sharing our craft in the form of workshops and boot camps and stuff like that. We have sketch workshops, we have principal workshops, app development workshops now. Right now, it's all local in the Bay Area. If you're interested, go to learn.imPekable.com, sign up for the newsletter, and we can update you on upcoming workshops. We have them both in the South Bay and in SF. And actually, we're also going to have some in our Fort Collins, Denver location as well. So if you're interested, we have some evening workshops, we have weekend workshops. to fit people's schedules. And that's probably the best way to maybe get your feet wet. Learn.imPekable.com. But other than that, we'd love to hear about you from imPekable.com or follow us on Dribbble. Just now starting our Behance. Keep an eye out for that. And you can always reach me on Twitter, Pek Pongpaet, and then Peck at imPekable. And if you can't remember that, just go to imPekable. There's a little chat widget that goes straight to my Slack, and you can chat with me there.
Thank you again. You've been a phenomenal guest. It's been great to have you. And folks, there you have it. Another one in the can. As always, you can find us on UXJOBS.io or on Twitter at IA_UXJOBS. We will see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. It's been a pleasure.